Brianna Wu is a video game developer and aficionado. She credits Princess Peach from Super Mario Bros. 2 for sparking her passion for games. That game showed her that playable female characters were not only possible, but necessary. In the years since, Brianna developed and released several hit games. If that's not enough, she founded her own company and became the host of a weekly isometric podcast. Brianna is an outspoken advocate for women in an industry dominated by men. Female video game developers make up just a small percentage of the industry. But by voicing her opinion, she became an unwitting victim of bullying, harassment, and death threats. Threats came from those involved with Gamergate, a misogynistic online campaign aimed at intimidating and silencing women in gaming. Refusing to back down, she appealed to law enforcement and government officials alike. She's pushing to strengthen oversight and punishment for perpetrators of online threats. She's here to share her experience and once again prove that she won't be silenced. Welcome to Full Frame.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get to Gamergate. I'm not sure all our viewers understand it, but before we do that, let's kind of back up. We talked about Super Mario Bros. 2. What was it about this game and this character that kind of led you on this path that you're on now, would you say?
Well, you know, I started gaming in 1985 when the Nintendo came out. It was the first year I got to be really excited about it. But the problem is it was always men having the adventure. Like Mario is a game about men, Mega Man is a game about men. And Princess Peach really stood out to me in Super Mario 2 because she wasn't just a woman in the game, she was also the most powerful character in that game. And you know, seeing a character I identified with was just so powerful, and it really made me feel like there was something I was missing. So what I've found frustrating professionally is now in 2015, women being the protagonist seems to be just as rare. So that's kind of the mission of my studio, to kind of make games for the rest of us.
And what's interesting is originally you wanted to be in this seat, the person asking the questions and not answering them. You studied journalism.
I did, I did.
How did this come about where you ended up on this game track?
Well, you know, when you lead a studio, you need a multitude of job skills. You know, I worked in politics for a while. Leading a studio is a very political job. Leading a game studio means doing marketing. And I found I've always had a passion for journalism. So I find that all these skills have kind of built on one another and kind of led me to this point here.
I was mentioning to you before we started taping that I'd gone to DigiPen in Seattle, which is this school where a lot of gamers go to learn the business. And I mentioned to you that there was nothing but men there.
Yeah.
You must have known entering this field that that was the landscape. What was it like? How daunting was it when you initially entered?
Well, I want to tell you, when I first went into this field, you know, I certainly believed women were equal, but you know, it wasn't something that really I thought about on a daily basis like I do now. What I found going into the video game industry is it is a drastically different situation than any other job I've ever had. And the truth is, men do dominate this field, and they're good people, but there are a million small things about our culture that kind of signal to women that you're not welcome here. So what I found is, for me to have this job and be successful at it requires me to kind of speak up about my own equality and, you know, the equality of my colleagues. So
you must seek out other women in the industry, and you must hear much the same thing?
I do, I do. You know, there's kind of, you know, women in game dev, we tend to talk to each other a lot behind the scenes and kind of have private conversations. And, you know, the things I bring to the forefront, talk about, you know, frustration with hiring practices, with promotional opportunities, with kind of being pushed into certain roles at a company. You know, this isn't something I feel. This is something I hear over and over again from my colleagues.
So for our viewers who have no idea what Gamergate is, and where they feel like this is a foreign language, take us there. Take us there. How did this all start? What is it?
Sure. So, you know, video games are really changing right now. They did a study in 1989 that showed that women were only 3% of gamers. In 2008, when the iPhone came out, women were only 17% of gamers. Today, we are 49% of gamers. So what you've had is this explosion of women that are playing video games in a very short amount of time. And what's happening because of that is basically since 1985, games have been marketed for men, made by men, every bit of it. It's like a male fantasy. But now that so many women are playing games, as an industry, we're kind of looking at the games we're putting out and saying, does this old playbook really still work in 2015? And the answer is it doesn't. So our industry is rapidly changing, and this is threatening a lot of people. So what has been happening in the last few years is this kind of online harassment of women, people that get very defensive and angry when women gamers ask for simple things like, hey, can we have a female playable character in some games? Very basic representation is tremendously threatening. So we've just basically been getting more and more online harassment. So what happened last year, sadly, is Boston game developer Zoe Quinn. She had a former boyfriend of hers release her entire love life online, made a ton of allegations with the purpose of discrediting her. And what happened was this, it's like there was a pot boiling on the stove and it caught the entire kitchen on fire. And what we've seen in the aftermath of that is just an explosion of harassment of women all over the industry. They've been going after us one by one. I myself have now had 86 death threats sent to me in the last 8 months for a simple message like women should be represented, and I think we should be able to work in this field too.
So you engage the conversation. This is a conversation going on online.
Absolutely.
A lot of just reprehensible things being said, and you're sitting there. I'm not going to sit back. I'm going to take part in this discussion. So
Absolutely.
you get online. You must have been just stunned at the vitriol and just the anger that came in your direction. I mean, give us a sense of the stuff that you were getting.
Sure. I gave a speech at Columbia a few weeks ago, and I'm there and I'm trying to inspire women engineers to enter this field because it's a great job. I love my job, and I leave this college. I'm feeling really good about what I've just done, and I look at my iPhone and someone's sending me death threats, and they're saying like, Brianna, I know where you live. I'm waiting outside your house for you to get home from Columbia. The last thing you ever feel before you die is going to be a drill bit going into your skull. I'm going to murder your husband and dogs too. And this is just another day of the week for me. And just to take a step back here, the reason I got involved in this was they were bullying my friends out of this field one by one. So I want for you to imagine online people going after your colleagues, like your closest friends, one by one, and harassing them until they left. And I couldn't stand by and watch that happen to the people that I cared about. So, I felt like I had to stand up. And the consequences for me and my family have been severe, but this has to change.
Severe, but I would think just even looking at the phone. I mean, it's exercises that most of us do on a daily basis. There's got to be trepidation every time you look at it.
It is.
So what can you do? What have you done? And obviously, you're continuing to speak out. So they haven't silenced you, which undoubtedly was what they were after.
Yes.
But have law enforcement have they been responsive? I mean, what can be done?
I wish I could sit here and tell you law enforcement has been responsive, because person to person, there are a lot of really good men and women in law enforcement that have worked with me on this. But the truth is, in all the hundreds and hundreds of death threats that have been sent to me, Zoe Quinn, and Anita Sarkeesian, there have been no prosecutions. Not one person to even be brought to a court to answer these charges. And I think it's a really deep problem. We have 15,000 FBI agents working here in the United States. As best as I have been able to tell, there are 0 of them whose job it is to look at these kind of threats and prosecute them. So I think what we're seeing is a disconnect between the dangers of the world we currently inhabit and our ability to prosecute those threats.
I want to get your quote right here. You say that games are the most misogynistic area of tech.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think that for 30 years, games have been created to cater to a very specific kind of player. It's typically male, white, straight, and I think a normal person that's not a gamer can look at what comes out and tell they're these kind of violent, very macho fantasies. So I think you have some people that really, really love games the way that they are and don't want them to change. Like, they base their identity in being gamers. And I don't think that's a particularly healthy thing. I also think it's really important to note, I don't want to censor any kind of game. All I'm looking to do is to widen the amount of games that come out. So yes, you can have these kind of more violent, macho fantasies, but let's have some more story-based games over here for the rest of us. It's ultimately about meeting the entire marketplace's needs.
Well, and you mentioned, it's no longer 3%. I mean, it's half the equation. It should be half of the games, you would think.
But I want to say something about that. If you look, we are half the market now. But there's a huge disconnect in the people making games and the people consuming games, because it's men financing the games, running the studios, making the games, marketing the games, doing everything at this side of the pipeline. On the journalism side, reviewing the games. And then over here we have women that are looking at this product and going, this doesn't speak to me. And I just think we can do better.
So, speaking of speaking to you, you also said Facebook, Tinder, Snapchat, Google, basically all the software out there in general, also in many respects male-dominated. How do we change that landscape, and how do we get women a seat at the table? More than maybe one seat, 50%, maybe 50% of the seats.
That would make sense. I think the systems you just noted are really important to note, because increasingly, we live our lives online. Like, I don't know about you, but I spend more time on Facebook and Twitter than I do at my local civic center. So when we're talking about tech, we are talking about the spaces that we currently inhabit as the human race. And the fact that they are made by men means they're kind of unsafe for women, because you have people that just aren't thinking about certain things along the way. Getting women involved with tech it's what we call in engineering a multifactorial problem. There are a lot of people that believe you can just kind of get young girls interested in tech and call it a day. But the truth is, this field is so hostile to us that we just lose women all along the way. We lose women in elementary school and high school and college when we're kind of harassed. We lose women with recruiting and hiring practices. And then when we become mothers, we lose women there because these companies don't really have policies that are friendly to moms. So, it's an entire spectrum of problem that we really need to sit down and have an adult look at.
Yeah, as I sit here listening to you, I think, we're here in 2015, and yet the gaming industry's back in 1950. But
I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, you've gotten a certain amount of notoriety. You just mentioned you were at Columbia University, obviously inspiring a lot of young women to enter the field. Do you think that these folks are finally realizing that perhaps their efforts are backfiring, that you're not going away, that the voices are not going to be silenced? Or do you think the message hasn't gotten through to them?
I don't think they're capable of understanding that they're harassers. They don't see, the people that send me death threats don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as noble warriors. And they don't have a problem with their actions. So this is a hard thing for me to talk about because I make video games. But let's talk in scientific terms about what video games do to you. I wish this weren't true, but studies have shown video games lower your empathy for people, and they do slow your social development. I wish that weren't true, but it's just the science of it. So I think that's one of the reasons we see this really pronounced harassment, because the people doing it just are very low in empathy.
Well, and the other thing is, if the games are developed in this sense that women aren't important, and they're trophies that you collect at the end of the game. I mean, the message they're being sent by the games themselves kind of lead to this.
It does. You can't have 30 years of women being represented as, damsels in distress and over-sexualized trophies and objects without that kind of affecting the way people feel about women on an unconscious level. And to just kind of return to what it's like for women in the professional sphere, almost all the discrimination I face and my colleagues face on a daily basis, it's unconscious by nature. And you have good men that are smart men, but they have unconscious assumptions that they don't realize really end up hurting us.
If you could wave that magic wand, if there was one thing you could change right now about the industry, what would it be?
Just see us as people. It's really it. You know, women in tech are frequently valued for our looks. We're talked over, we're minimized, we just aren't valued. And all I'm asking for is the chance to have the same kind of respect that I see men in this field do. But it's a huge challenge, like with getting jobs, getting funding for projects, just outright discrimination as you get older. It's a very difficult equation. So I just want people to see me and my colleagues as a person.
Well, hopefully they saw that in this broadcast. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you for inviting me.